Well, hello everybody, and welcome to this Thursday Trauma Q&A from me, Renee, at Keeping Your Heart. So grateful for those who are tuning in either live or in the future. The future. Just excited to start the series. We're doing this the month of August on Thursdays at 2 p.m. Trauma Q&A. So I'm getting a lot of questions from people about different facets of trauma, trauma-informed care, trauma-informed ministry, what it means for parenting, what it means in the home and in other places. So I thought, instead of just continuing to send out just messages, maybe I would take a minute to respond to some of these questions in person-ish, right? This is in person as we get sometimes right now during this COVID time. So first of all, let me tell you a little bit about me. If I am new to you, my name is Renee, and I care very deeply about making sure that families and communities have the things that they need to do to sustain in caring for people who've experienced trauma. So trauma is super prevalent. We're all experiencing a collective trauma right now with COVID. So now we have even more of a reason to start to explore what do we do on the other end of it. We're not through it yet, just so you know, we're still going through it. So collectively. So what do we do, and how do we respond, and what are ways that we can really make sure that we have the things in place to continue to do the good work that we're doing. So I am an adoptive mom of 2 kids from foster care, and they moved in at ages 6 and 7, and they are teenagers now. And over the last 9+ years, we have learned in a bit of a crucible, what do we do, and how do we respond, and how do we not respond? We've learned a lot from our mistakes. And I'm also a director of trauma and whole person care at a local nonprofit, as well as a TBI practitioner and Empowered to Connect parent trainer, a Living Compass community wellness advocate. There's a whole list of stuff. You can go check it out on my website if you're really interested. But that means that my whole work life is spent really working on how do we sustain in this, because it's really hard. So thank you so much. That Keeping Your Heart is about that whole thing, keeping your heart engaged. So thank you so much for being here. And thank you for taking some time to learn about trauma. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background information just to start the conversation, and then I'm going to head into some of the questions that were asked. So when we're talking about trauma, we're talking about the 3 E's of trauma. E, like the letter E, like E. Okay. And the 3 E's of trauma is an event or series of events that's experienced by an individual where there is a threat, and it has lasting effects on that individual's ability to fully function in a certain area of life, whether that is physically, mentally, emotionally, relationally, spiritually. So it's affecting their ability to function in that way. It's getting in the way. And that's when we know that it's trauma. So there's stress. Like, we all have stress, and stress can be either negative or positive. So some people are surprised to hear that stress is positive. We can talk a little bit about that too. But so stress is normal, and we need stress in order to grow. But when something is happening that's a trauma, it's when there is an uncontrolled event that is really causing that person's brain and body to believe that there's a potential for them to be significantly harmed or to die. So it takes them out of their prefrontal cortex and their cognitive thinking brain, and they go into their survival brain, which is all about how do I not die. And so this is that stress response, and when that's activated over and over and over again, it begins to create some toxic stress in our system. There's all kinds of different ways that shows up, but it stops some of our functioning, because that stress activation will have an impact on the chemicals in our brain. It'll have an impact in how our body works, our respiration, our heart, and what happens in our muscles, and all kinds of other things. And so if as it's impacting the functioning, we then are experiencing trauma. So I'd love for us to think about just for a second, if we think about the symptoms of trauma and what we see, and how we know we're experiencing toxic stress and trauma, is that sometimes we have a decreased concentration or inability to focus, or sometimes we feel, we might say that we are not able to really prioritize, or we feel numb or detached, or we having sleep problems, or we're eating a little more or a little less, or we're engaging in things that give us a dopamine hit, that are feel-good drugs, that involve things like stimulants or alcohol or eating or shopping or all kinds of other things, just to get through the day or the week. That we need that pleasure center fired up in order to continue to function. So those are ways that we can tell that the trauma is really affecting us. So we're not able to maybe fully complete our work responsibilities, or we're not able to fully engage in our studies, or we're not able to fully, we have no motivation for cleaning up after ourselves, or we have difficulty in conversations. It's just easier not to engage with people. So in each of these things, we're not able to fully engage our true self, so that we are bringing, working, facilitate, functioning fully in those areas, right? There's a little stress right there, my recall. So that's when we can see these impact of trauma. Well, let's think back a little bit. So this is on August 6th, 2020, and only a mere 5 months ago, we started to hear these rumblings of this thing, of this coronavirus thing, and then all of a sudden it became pretty serious. It had a significant impact. All of a sudden, there was an event or series of events that started to have a significant impact on an effect on us. And it became this worry of, is this life-threatening? What's going to happen? We start to notice some people are getting sick around us, some people are dying around us. The transmission rate, there's an awful lot of information, but we also don't have control over the situation. We don't know everything. We don't have enough information. Our brains have not adapted to how are we going to address this particular crisis. We don't have a great strategy or a plan because we've never experienced this before. So we're going to have a lot of uncertainty. We're going to have a lot of going into our downstairs brain and having very emotional responses, which is, emotion's okay. It's not a problem for us to have an emotional response. That's just our emotions, and that's our feelings, and those are really important. But it's that when we are not able to connect our emotions to our thinking as well. So we want to connect those two. So we're going to have these survival responses, which are to keep us safe and also tell us when there's danger. And then we have the thinking of, okay, what do I do? When I have this feeling that's telling me that I need to pay attention to something, and now what do I do? So we've been experiencing, right, effects, the experience of this effect, and it's having lasting effects on our functioning. So we have not been able to fully function in relationship, right? Because we've been disconnected from people. We've not been able to fully function, maybe spiritually, because there's not enough space to breathe. Maybe there's not space for us to participate in things the same way that were filling us spiritually. We have not been able to function fully in our emotional regulation because we've been dealing with our grief and loss cycle of what COVID has done during this time. And so it's impacted that full functioning. So we see that we're experiencing this collective trauma. So part of our questions of today is, hey, I was already helping a child from a hard place, a child who's experienced trauma, to heal. So now what do I do? We've got this COVID thing going on. And so it is actually a really interesting thing that what I've seen with the families that I serve is there's generally Okay. Two kind of camps that people fall in. So one of them is either they will fall into the um, they oh, how do I say this nice? I'm trying to be diplomatic while being live. Um, they were a family who would say to me, "Hey, so you know, my kid, I'm noticing these like behaviors at a certain time of day with certain." You know, getting ready for bed or at dinner time or coming home from school, and there's these major flip outs that are happening, or tantrums, or I'm seeing lots of behaviors escalate during these times, or when they're going to school. And so often I would say to those families, you know, maybe you need to make the world a little smaller. Maybe slowing down is going to be the thing that's going to scaffold your family for success during this time. And the thing is we have all of these pressures, right? We have all these expectations that we put on ourselves and that others put on us about what our happy families are supposed to be. And so a child who is struggling to communicate and ends up using their behaviors to communicate their needs gets in the way of that happy family experience. And so it doesn't feel really convenient to be like, yeah, actually do less stuff that's it's gonna make it feel a little more painful at first. But what that does is it slows you down enough to see what's going on behind these behaviors, and what the needs are. So it was really interesting that for those families that we'd already been having this conversation, that during COVID, they're like, hey, actually things have kind of gotten better. I've noticed that when I've slowed down, things have gotten a little more calm, and I've been able to engage a little bit more. And part of it's we're not as distracted. We have less options in front of us, which means that we're able to pay attention a little bit more. Now, for families who have children who've had really significant behavior issues, maybe there's been some safety issues prior to COVID, often this has actually exacerbated it because the in-home supports that might have been there in place, the wraparound, the other community supports, if they're not available to the family, that makes it harder to be able to, for parents, the caregivers, to self-regulate so that they can stay calm and keep their amygdala calm, to be able to be creative and problem solving and make decisions as the child's behaviors are expressing their distress. So those are kind of the two things that I've seen. So I'm not hearing that question from the families for whom actually this time has helped them to be able to provide more peace in the home. I'm hearing this from the families who have already that probably were already on their way to burnout and maybe compassion fatigue before all of this happened, and then their supports are taken away. So I want to say for those families, we see you, and you are known and you are understood and you are not alone. We are definitely getting a lot of calls about that and people who are reaching out and asking for support. So one thing I would say is I'm going to put this on my Facebook page and then on my website as well. There's a great worksheet that comes from the Buffalo Social Work School that is an emergency self-care plan. And what this is it is a great opportunity for us to look at how does our stress and the trauma that's coming up in us, how does that manifest? So what are we feeling physiologically? What are we feeling emotionally? How do we know when we're hitting the end of our rope? And then what are we going to do? And then who's going to do that with us? Who's going to help us? And so we have this great opportunity to take some time. And so I will recommend that you definitely take some time to look at that. And build up what your plan is going to be for this particular time when maybe there's not as many resources. But I mean, this is something that we should have all the time, but that's one thing. Another thing is that a lot of what's happening is we're feeling like things are out of control, and they are out of control. They're out of our control for sure. And so I want us to think about when we're working with kids from hard places and we notice that they get very controlling in certain situations, often what I tell parents to reflect on is that child doesn't feel safe, right? So maybe that's kind of how we're feeling right now too. There's not a whole lot of safety. We were all kind of counting on maybe for parenting for school to come back and kind of get back in the rhythm and give some schedule. We know how important schedule is for our kiddos and how important it is for us as well to give us also some time apart so we can come back together. So we know that that was that we're not feeling safe because of that, and so we might get want to find control in other ways. So we sit with our kids when they don't feel safe, they will try to find control because they're like, okay, no one else is providing enough safety for me, enough felt safety in the space, so I'm going to have to be the in charge person right now. So instead, what we do is we start to look at what are the ways that we can have control and choice in the situation. And so one of those that we can do for ourselves is to actually write down the things that we can't, some of the things that we can control, right? So that is taking a look at, you know, I can control a little bit of when I go to bed or how much Netflix I watch or if I'm drinking more water, right? And these are all things that support you. I can control, you know, making it a point to write down and make sure that I shower, right? No judgment. I actually believe that we need to give a little more space in our biome. So, but you know, at a certain point, you need to shower. And so, you know, this is a parent. If you're a parent of a newborn, it's the same as if you're a parent of a kid from a hard place. You shower whenever you can catch a shower because you're just trying to keep everybody alive. So that's something that you can control. You know, you can control, but trying new breath supports, meaning the ways that you're breathing that help you to sustain in situations. There are things that you can control. So making a note of that and reminding yourself also that you're a problem solver. So that's an important thing. So what happens is when we start to feel a lot of distress, we feel like it's never going to end and we have no impact. But we've been in stress before and it has ended, and we were able to impact that somehow. So we survived. And so that to remind ourselves and take a moment and say, yes, this is very stressful. I'm going to acknowledge how I'm feeling. I'm feeling anxious. I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling angry, right? All those feelings are valid. So giving yourself validation that that feeling is a normal human response. Yes, it's okay to be human and have responses. So you're responding, and then and saying, yeah, and it's a good thing I'm having feelings instead of shutting down, right? So then you move to the next minute when you figure out where you're at, and continuing to breathe and figure out what those supports are. So that was one of our questions. Just checking in really quick here to see if any others have come up. Okay. Here we go. Oops. Hey, so that was an interesting button. That's always something you wanna see. Okay. So that was interesting. All right. So anyway, great. Thank you. All right. Just checking that one little, nope, let's not do that. Okay, great. Another question I had to do with, you know, how long do I have to do this attachment thing? So if we could reflect on that for just a moment for those who have wondered because this connected, attuned, attached, parenting, caregiving, teaching, ministering is definitely costly, right? It is not free to us. It costs something. So people want to know, how long do I have to sustain this? So my answer tends to be until the person doesn't need it. The good news is when people are fully supported, and we start to, in their support, gently increase the um, uh, well, raise the bar, right? We gently increase appropriate levels of stress. We help them to master more and more brain processes that give them strategies for how they're going to address issues in the future. And the more that we are doing this appropriately, the more that we are setting them up to be able to succeed. But we can teach kids all sorts of skills that we think are going to be like the important things for launching in life. So, if you think about those, it could be things like, paying your bills and being able to get a job and go to school and, you know, order your utilities and find a home and those types of things. But what we know is that if there's not a foundation of being able to be in trusting relationships, those skills will go by the wayside because they'll never get to the place where they'll be able to sustain that. Because if you don't have healthy relationship, the likelihood that you'll be in survival brain versus prefrontal cortex is much greater. Right? So if you're not in trusting relationships where you are seen, valued, and heard, you will, in fact, spend your time trying to get to safety. And so when people say this to kids who are really it's in their downstairs brain, well, what about in 5 years from now, or when you're an adult? That future and possibility, that's too far away. I just want to not die right now. I just want to not hurt right now. And if you think I'm overstating that, I would like you to go back and think about where you were at the first couple weeks or the first part of March and the weeks going in the first part of COVID, where you were absolutely overwhelmed, right? And where you kept thinking, oh, well, I'm at home, maybe I can do all these things and be productive. And then you're like, I can't. I'm actually exhausted. I'm not thinking well. I think I'm just going to wrap myself up in a blanket and watch some Netflix, maybe order in some ice cream, right? Like, this is the place we were. We weren't able to do all of the things that were in front of us. We had to stop and grace ourselves and realize we are not living in a normal time. Well, this is the brain that our kiddos from hard places has most of the time. They're trying to make it. They're trying to survive, and they're trying to put in connections between this downstairs brain and upstairs brain, but they can't do it themselves. We were not meant to do this ourselves. It's meant to be mentored by a trusted adult, a competent caregiver that's responding. So this attachment work is that we are continually, regardless of the age of the person. Okay, so if a person is an adult and you recognize that there's some attachments work that you're doing with them, and that's healthy and balanced, okay, cool. As adults, we're responsible for meeting our own needs at that point. But for the kid in front of us, this is just a really great time. We don't want to miss this opportunity, and do not miss this shot to really meet needs and help them to know that they can trust, and know that they can depend, and know that they can learn from, and that they can have mentors that are for them and that are supportive. Because if we're meeting that attachment cycle over and over and over again, we are connecting those two parts of the brain, and so that they can get to prefrontal cortex decision making. So we're getting actually to the end of the time for today, and I've probably actually usually I stream this a little different, and I think I failed to stream it to Facebook. So for those Facebook people who are watching it later, my apologies. But thank you for your time today. Feel free to add questions down here, or you can send them to me on my Facebook. You can send them to me through the website at reneemdupuy.com, or direct message through Instagram at Keeping Your Heart. So thank you so much. I hope that you are all well. Until the next time, don't forget to keep your heart. Bye.